Okay, in this podcast, I want to talk for a second about Chiang Kaishek, who you're going to be reading more about him than anybody else in this course, even more than Mao. Let me bring up a picture. Um, Chiang Kai-shek, as I hope I've made clear, is the head of the nationalist. He is the internationally recognized leader of China. Um, he succeeds as head of the Nationalist Party, which controls the Chinese state, in 1925. When Sun Yat-sen, who had led the revolution against the Manchu dynasty, the overthrow of the Manchu dynasty, when he dies, kind of a tragic figure. So Chiang Kai-shek, got to get to know him. He's a big player in this story. He's one of the big four. You know, you've got on the Allied side, you've got Roosevelt, Churchill. Who would the third one be? There's got to be another one. Oh, I guess Stalin, I guess. And then Chiang Kai-shek. So he was a military man, Chiang Kai-shek. In 1906, he began his military career in North China, and surprisingly, he served in the Japanese Army from 1909 to 1911. He did some training in Japanese military schools when he was a young man, which is very ironic, right? This kind of points to the fact that Japan and China haven't always been enemies. But anyway, that's another story. So Chiang Kai-shek, a military man, does some training with the Japanese army. He actually was very impressed with the Japanese army. He adopts the Spartan ideals of the Japanese samurai warriors. He was a very stoic figure, a very ascetic figure, very controversial figure, by the way, Chiang Kai-shek, very controversial. Now, when I was in college, Chiang Kai-shek was seen as a villain. He was seen as the bad guy. He was seen as a loser. Um, but now his reputation is on the rise. You'll see in the book as you read it, Mitta actually is quite sympathetic to Chiang Kai-shek. He really admires Chiang Kai-shek for not surrendering to the Japanese. He tries to show the challenges that were faced by Chiang Kai-shek because Chiang Kai-shek did some pretty terrible things. Um, so his reputation has rebounded in a big way. And also in China today, Chiang Kai-shek is actually seen as a hero. His home is a big tourist attraction. So not only among historians, but among the Chinese themselves, although he was the enemy of the communist government, his reputation is on the rebound in large part because of his refusal to surrender to the Japanese. So it's kind of funny how, things turn out historically. Okay, so he supports the revolution against the Manchu dynasty, becomes a rising officer. He is mentored by Sun Yat-sen, again, who led the revolution against the Manchu dynasty. And in 1923, Chiang Kai-shek is actually sent to the Soviet Union to study the policies and the tactics of the Red Army. But he's horrified by what he sees in the Soviet Union. The collectivization, the lack of any kind of individual say. He hates the fact that the economy is all in the hands of the state, that there's almost zero private sector in the Soviet Union. And he's appalled by what he sees in the Soviet Union. And he comes back to China from his experience in the Soviet Union just a rabid anti-communist. That's one of his driving motivations. He just thinks it's a terrible system for China, and also I think he senses a threat from the communists. So he's well trained, well schooled, has had some international travel, and what happens is that in 1925 Sun Yat-sen dies, and Chiang Kai-shek had been he had risen to the ranks of one of being a recognized leader of the Nationalist Party, and he becomes through a very Byzantine set of circumstances, which I don't have time to talk to you about. He becomes head of the Nationalist Party, Chiang Kai-shek does, which means he becomes the head of the internationally recognized government in China. Remember, the nationalists were the recognized um, people like the United States and Great Britain. When they went to talk to China, they talked to the head of the Nationalist Party. They recognized the nationalist as the governing party of China. So he's got a problem, though, when he becomes head of the nationalist. The nationalists had been working with the communists in the 1920s. They actually had collaborated together. They were working together. It was a very, very unstable relationship. But the Civil War had not happened yet. So you do have the nationalists and the communists that were working together. And in fact, the communists for a short while become an arm of the Nationalist Party, although they really maintain their own autonomy. So Chiang Kai-shek, he can't stand this. He can't stand the fact that the Communist Party has gained some kind of voice. And he decides he needs to wipe out the communists. He wants to wipe out the communists. So what he does is he stabs them in the back. So there had been a nationalist communist alliance through the 1920s, but in 1927, and this is what's really interesting is Chiang Kai-shek is assisted by urban gangsters and warlord militias. These warlords are all over the place. I could really drive you crazy talking about all the warlords. I drive myself crazy too. But what he does is he organizes what you might call a coup against the Chinese communists, which again, his party's in an alliance with the Chinese communists, but he decides they have to go, and he's going to try to wipe them out. So in Shanghai, and I hope this locate Shanghai on your map, he organizes a massacre of the communists that are in Shanghai. Hundreds, if not thousands, of communists were rounded up. They were arrested, and many were tortured, and most were executed or assassinated. Now, this is called the Shanghai Massacre, or the April 12th incident, because it happened on April 12th. Was a pivotal moment in the history of China, the Communist Party, and the Nationalist Party. It triggered a national purge of communists from the Nationalist Party. So communists everywhere that had been working more or less in concert with the nationalists, now suddenly the nationalists have turned on them, in some cases with the help of urban gangsters, and they arrest them, torture them, and kill them. So all throughout China, the nationalists turn on their communist allies and try to wipe them out. The surviving communists were either forced underground, or they were forced into areas that were outside of the nationalist control. So what had been the United Front, it was called the First United Front, that had come into existence in the 1920s, between the Communist Party, which is called the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the Nationalists. And the Russians are kind of orchestrating this alliance. But you know what? They're okay. They're not okay when Chiang massacres a communist, but they don't end their alliance with him. Stalin just doesn't have a lot of respect for the Chinese communist. He has more respect for Chiang Kai-shek because Chiang Kai-shek is more powerful. So what happens is the Communist Party is almost decimated. It's almost decimated in the late 1920s by Chiang Kai-shek, when the First United Front is completely undermined, when Chiang Kai-shek leads a purge against the communists, and the communists are forced to go underground. And the Soviet government, although it's probably not happy by this incident, doesn't react to it, doesn't break its relations with Chiang Kai-shek. So you can imagine the legacy of the April 12th incident in the minds of the communists. uh, Mao's wife was arrested, tortured, and executed a couple of years later. Um, you can just see that it was going to sow some seeds of very, very serious discord.